I freed a Comanche woman, and she wouldn't let me walk away from what I'd done. Samuel Turner had always believed that life on the Texas plains would be quiet and predictable. At 25, he had spent most of his days traveling between small towns and trading posts, carrying supplies and goods for settlers, traders, and the occasional traveler. The wide open sky, the endless stretches of grass, and the distant hills were familiar companions, but he had never imagined that one night would change his life forever. He was on a route he knew well, moving slowly westward with a small cart of supplies. The sun was just beginning to sink behind the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the air carried the faint scent of dry grass and wild sage. Break. Samuel had been thinking about nothing in particular, enjoying the quiet rhythm of his journey, when he noticed something unusual in the distance. A thin plume of smoke rose from a small camp. At first he thought it might be another trading party, or perhaps some travelers resting for the night. But as he drew closer, Samuel's instincts, honed over years on the road, told him that this was different. There was a tension in the way the horses grazed and the flicker of movement near the fire. Something was not right. He slowed his cart and pulled the reins, letting the animals rest while he watched carefully from behind a ridge. What he saw made his heart beat faster. A small group of people had gathered around a woman, and from the way she held herself, struggling and refusing to sit, it was clear she was not there by choice. Samuel's first thought was to turn away, to ignore what he saw. After all, he was just a trader passing through, a simple man with no army or protection. But something about her caught his attention. Her eyes were wide, alert, and unbroken, even though her situation seemed hopeless. There was fear there, yes, but also determination. Samuel couldn't explain why, but he felt a pull toward her, a strange sense that he could not simply walk away. For several minutes he stayed hidden, watching the camp, analyzing the terrain, and trying to think of what to do. Finally, he made his decision. He would help her even if it meant risking his own safety. He crept closer under the cover of darkness, using the shadows of the trees and the uneven ground to his advantage. Every step was measured, careful not to make a sound. Every heartbeat reminding him that discovery could mean disaster. As he approached, Samuel noticed that the people guarding her were fewer than he had expected. They were distracted, laughing and shouting among themselves, which gave him a small window of opportunity. He waited for the moment when one of them wandered slightly away from the group, and then, moving quickly, he slipped into the camp. The woman had noticed him immediately. Their eyes met, and for a brief second Samuel saw the mix of fear and hope reflected back at him. But she didn't speak. There wasn't time. But her nod told him she understood. He motioned for her to follow him quietly, and she did, keeping low and moving as silently as he did. The first part of their escape was the hardest. Samuel had to navigate through the camp without being seen, avoiding the flicker of the firelight that might reveal their presence. Grasp. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves felt magnified in the night, and he prayed that his heart would not betray him. Once they were outside the immediate area, the woman finally spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. "You should not have come," she said in broken English, her tone both grateful and wary. "They will come for me, for you too."
"I don't care," Samuel replied softly, trying to keep his voice steady.
"We'll make it. Just keep moving." They ran together across the plains, the cool night air biting at their faces, the grass brushing against their legs. Samuel's mind raced with thoughts of the dangers ahead, of the uncertainty of what they were doing, and of the strange connection he already felt to this woman he barely knew. Her name, he would soon learn, was Ahuli, and even in this moment of peril she carried herself with courage that he could hardly imagine. Hours passed as they moved through the darkness, breath Samuel relied on his knowledge of the land to find a route that avoided the main trails and settlements, hoping to keep them out of sight. Every noise in the night made them both flinch: the distant cry of a coyote, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the snap of a branch underfoot. Samuel could sense her tension, the way she stayed close to him, watching every shadow, every movement. Despite the fear, there was a strange sense of calm between them. Words were few, but their actions communicated a bond of trust and reliance. Samuel realized that for all his years of traveling, he had never felt responsible for anyone in quite this way. Ahuli was not someone he could leave behind, and he was learning quickly that helping her meant more than just guiding her to safety. It meant protecting her, understanding her, and preparing for the challenges ahead. By the time dawn broke, painting the sky with pale light, they had reached a small grove of trees where they could rest briefly. Samuel gave water to Ahuli, and she returned the gesture in kind, sharing what little she had carried with her. For a moment, they allowed themselves to breathe, to rest from the intensity of the night, though both knew that danger still lurked nearby. Ahuli finally spoke more fully, her English improving as she struggled to explain her story. Dispatch. She told Samuel about how she had been captured, the people who had held her, and the hardships she had endured. Samuel listened quietly, absorbing every word, realizing the depth of her strength and the injustice of her situation. He could feel his own heart tighten at her words, knowing that by helping her, he had stepped into a world far more complicated and dangerous than he had anticipated. By the time the sun rose fully, casting warm light across the plains, Samuel and Ahuli had formed an unspoken pact. He would get her to safety, no matter the cost. She would trust him enough to follow, no matter the fear. And together, they would face the unknown challenges ahead, bound by a shared experience that neither could forget. As they set out again, Samuel glanced at her and thought about the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. He had come to the plains expecting routine and solitude, but now he was part of a story that would change both their lives forever. And though he could not yet see the dangers that lay ahead, he knew one thing clearly: there was no turning back now. The plains stretched endlessly before them, but Samuel felt a sense of purpose he had never known. Every step they took was a step into uncertainty, but also into courage, trust, and the beginning of a bond that neither distance nor danger could easily break. And in that quiet morning light, with Ahuli moving beside him, Samuel realized that sometimes doing what is right requires more bravery than anyone can imagine, and that the journey of helping another could also lead to discovering one's own strength. Samuel and Ahuli moved cautiously through the plains, the morning sun warming their backs but offering no comfort from the unease that clung to them. Every step forward was a delicate balance between safety and speed. Samuel knew the dangers they faced were not only from her former captors, but from the unpredictable wilds of the land itself: sudden drops, hidden streams, and animals that could strike without warning. He had traveled these routes countless times before. Yet now, with Ahuli beside him, the stakes felt impossibly high. Ahuli walked silently, her eyes scanning the horizon constantly. She had learned to read the land in ways Samuel could not yet understand. A slight change in the grass, a rustle of leaves in the wind, a distant bird's flight, all spoke to her of possible danger. Samuel admired her vigilance, though he noticed a shadow of exhaustion behind her steady gaze. The night had been long and sleep had been scarce, yet she refused to complain or slow her pace. Samuel tried to lighten the mood. "You're stronger than you think," he said quietly, not wanting to break the fragile calm between them. Ahuli glanced at him, a faint smile breaking the tension. "And you are braver than you know," she replied in halting English. "To help me, many would run away." Samuel felt a mixture of pride and discomfort. Pride that he had acted, that he had not hesitated when it mattered most. Discomfort because he knew the road ahead would demand more courage than he could yet imagine. They walked for hours, the tall grass brushing against their legs, the landscape slowly changing from open plains to scattered clusters of trees. As midday approached, they found a small stream, its water clear and cold. Samuel knelt to drink, scooping handfuls to refresh both himself and Ahuli. Breath. She crouched beside him, her fingers brushing the water's surface as if testing its depth and safety.
He realized that even in this small moment of calm, the bond between them grew stronger.
They were no longer simply strangers. They had become allies, reliant on one another for survival. "I should not have come alone," Samuel admitted, breaking the silence.
I did not know how dangerous this would be. Ahuli shook her head. Fate is strange, she said softly.
Sometimes we meet people we need, and we do not know why at first. Perhaps you were meant to help me, as I was meant to survive. Samuel considered her words. He had never thought of life in such terms, as fate, as purpose. But with Ahuli, the world felt sharper, more alive, as if every choice carried weight far beyond the moment. After drinking, they continued their journey. Samuel led them through a narrow path lined with trees, careful to avoid the main trails where settlers and travelers might pass. They moved silently, communicating with gestures and brief words. Ahuli's story began to unfold in fragments, stories of her village, her family, and the life she had known before capture. Samuel listened intently, understanding that these details were more than memories. They were pieces of her identity she refused to let fade. Hours passed, and the sun climbed high. Samuel noticed the fatigue settling into both their bodies. They had been moving steadily without rest, relying on the adrenaline of escape to carry them forward. Finally, he found a sheltered clearing beneath a large oak tree, where they could pause without fear of immediate discovery. Ahuli sat down, leaning against the trunk, and Samuel offered her a small piece of bread he had carried. She accepted it with a nod of gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "You risk much for me. I do not forget." Samuel shook his head. "I could not do otherwise," he replied. "No one should be forced into something they do not want." They sat together in silence for a time, the quiet interrupted only by the distant calls of birds and the rustle of the wind through the branches. Oration of Huli, closely.
Despite the exhaustion, her eyes were sharp, alert, and unwavering.
There was a strength there he had not expected, a resilience that seemed to defy the hardships she had faced. After a short rest, they resumed their journey. The terrain became rougher, with rocky outcrops and sudden dips that demanded careful navigation. Samuel took the lead, guiding them along safer paths, while Ahuli followed, her movements precise and deliberate. Occasionally, she would pause to study the ground, to note subtle signs of movement, footprints, broken twigs, or disturbed soil. By late afternoon, they reached the edge of a dense forest. Samuel hesitated, knowing that while the trees offered cover, they also posed new dangers. Hidden streams, uneven ground, and wild animals could turn the forest into a trap if they were not careful. But Ahuli seemed at home among the trees, moving with a natural ease that Samuel could not match. As they entered the forest, she pointed to a path that twisted between the trees. "This way," she said. "We can hide here, and they will not find us easily."
Samuel nodded, impressed by her instinct.
He followed, trusting her knowledge of the land. As they moved deeper, the forest became cooler, the sunlight filtering through the leaves in soft, shifting patterns. For the first time, Samuel felt a slight relief, a sense that they might, at least temporarily, be safe. But the tension remained. Samuel knew they could not rest for long. Her captors would eventually search, and the world beyond the forest was uncertain. He also realized that helping Ahuli meant more than guiding her through physical danger. It meant protecting her emotionally, understanding her fears, and acknowledging the courage she had shown simply by surviving. As evening approached, Samuel and Ahuli found a hidden spot near a small stream where they could make a temporary camp. They gathered fallen branches for a small fire, careful to keep it low and hidden. Samuel cooked a modest meal, sharing it with Ahuli, who had learned to conserve her energy and resources.
While they ate, Ahuli spoke more about her life before capture.
She told Samuel of her village, her family, and the traditions she cherished. Samuel listened, realizing that each story, each detail, was a piece of her identity that she was determined to protect. Patient. He also understood that the bond between them was growing, not as friendship alone, but as a shared experience of trust and survival. After the meal, they settled beside the fire, the flames casting warm light on their faces. Samuel noticed a quiet determination in Ahuli. She was not simply waiting to be saved. She was actively thinking, planning, and learning how to survive alongside him.
"I owe you my life," Ahuli said finally, her voice steady despite the exhaustion.
But I will not let you think this ends with my safety. You must understand, what you have done changes more than you know.
Samuel looked at her, puzzled but attentive.
I only did what was right, he said.
I do not yet understand the rest.
Ahuli nodded, her eyes reflecting the firelight. You will, she said softly.
In time, you will see why you cannot walk away from this. Not truly. Samuel did not fully understand, but he felt the weight of her words. Helping her was no longer a single act. It was a commitment, one that carried responsibility far beyond that moment. He realized that courage alone was not enough. He would need wisdom, patience, and resilience to navigate the challenges ahead.
As night fell, they lay beside the fire, keeping watch in shifts.
Samuel's mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead, the dangers, the unknown paths, and the lessons he would have to learn. Yet despite the uncertainty, he felt a sense of purpose he had never known before. He was not just a traveler anymore. He was part of a story that demanded bravery, compassion, and understanding.
Ahuli, meanwhile, sat quietly beside him, her gaze fixed on the dark forest beyond.
Samuel could sense her alertness, her readiness for any challenge that might come. He admired her strength and realized that, though he had saved her physically, there was much she would teach him about courage, trust, and the human spirit. As the fire dwindled to embers, Samuel and Ahuli fell into a light sleep, both aware that the night was only a temporary reprieve. The journey ahead would test them in ways they could not yet imagine. But for now, in the quiet of the forest, they had each other, and that was enough to carry them forward. And so, as the stars shone above, Samuel felt a deep understanding take root. The act of saving another was not a single event, but a journey, one that required strength, commitment, and an openness to be changed forever by the life he had chosen to touch. The morning light filtered through the thick trees, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Samuel awoke before the sun had fully risen, alert as ever. He had learned the hard way that resting too deeply in these lands could be dangerous. Ahuli was already awake, crouched by the small stream near their camp, quietly watching the water flow. Breaths. Samuel noticed how calm she seemed, yet there was a sharp intensity in her gaze, as if she was already thinking 2 steps ahead. For a moment he considered the reality of their situation. He had saved Ahuli. But the consequences of that decision were now pressing heavily on his mind. Her captors would not give up easily, and he could not pretend that their escape was without risk. Every decision he made could put both of their lives in jeopardy. Despite this, he could feel a growing distance between what he wanted to leave and continue his journey alone, and what he knew he could not do, abandon Ahuli narration. He walked over to her and spoke softly.
We should keep moving before the forest wakes fully.
Brit, someone might be searching for you.
Ahuli looked up, her eyes meeting his. I know, she said simply.
There was no fear in her voice, only a quiet determination that reminded Samuel why he could not just leave her behind. They packed their small belongings and continued along the narrow path she had chosen the day before. Samuel was impressed by her ability to navigate the forest, to find hidden trails and avoid the main roads. It became clear to him that Ahuli was more than just brave. She was intelligent and capable, with a knowledge of survival that he could not match. Yet he also noticed her weariness, the small signs of exhaustion she tried to hide. A slightly slower step, a hand brushing her hair away from her face, a brief pause to catch her breath. As they moved, Samuel tried to broach the subject that had been troubling him since their first night together.
Ahuli,
I think we should consider parting ways soon. I can take you to a settlement where you will be safe, and then I can continue my route.
You'll be safe, and I can return to my life. Ahuli's eyes narrowed slightly, and Samuel noticed a flicker of frustration in her expression. Breath. She stopped walking and turned to him, her voice steady but firm. No, she said. You do not understand. You cannot just leave.
what you have done. It is not something that ends with my safety alone. Samuel was taken aback.
He had expected gratitude, perhaps relief, but not this insistence. What do you mean? He asked, unsure whether to press or step back.
Ole pointed toward the distant plains where the light of the rising sun illuminated the edge of the forest. There are others who will suffer because of what you did. Others who will seek revenge. Others who will see this as weakness, as an opportunity.
You cannot simply walk away and pretend it does not exist. Samuel's mind raced. He had known his actions might have consequences, but he had never anticipated the depth of responsibility Ahuli was placing on him. It was one thing to save someone. It was another entirely to be asked to face the results of that action.
He realized that helping her was no longer a simple act of courage. It had become a moral obligation.
They continued walking in silence for some time, the weight of her words hanging heavily between them. Samuel found himself reflecting on the past few days, the decision to intervene, the night of the escape, and the long journey through the forest. Every step they had taken together had strengthened his bond with Ahuli, yet now he saw clearly that this bond carried a responsibility he could not ignore. Eventually they reached a small clearing where sunlight streamed down through the branches in golden streaks. Samuel stopped and crouched, examining the ground for signs of pursuit. There were no tracks yet, but he knew it was only a matter of time before her captors realized she was gone. Ahuli joined him, crouching silently by his side. I know you want to help me, but you must also help yourself, she said quietly. You cannot run from this. Not anymore. Samuel felt a pang of frustration and fear. He had always been a man who believed he could solve problems with careful planning and swift action. Now he faced a challenge that could not be solved alone. Ahuli was not just asking him to protect her. She was asking him to confront the consequences of his choices, to face danger willingly, and to accept that courage often meant more than escaping unharmed. Bad as the day wore on, they moved cautiously, taking care to stay hidden while searching for a safer route out of the forest.
Samuel's mind wandered back to the life he had known before this journey. Quiet trading routes, familiar towns.
Breath Tower. None of that seemed relevant now.
Everything he had taken for granted had shifted, replaced by a reality where each choice carried weight, and each action could have far-reaching consequences.
Ahuli spoke occasionally, her voice breaking the silence with observations about the land, memories of her village, or warnings about possible dangers ahead. Samuel listened closely, realizing that her knowledge was not only practical but also deeply insightful. She seemed to understand the land and the people who lived near it in ways he never could. He felt a growing respect for her, combined with a sense of humility. She was his equal in many ways, perhaps even his teacher. By late afternoon, they reached a ridge overlooking a wide valley. Samuel paused, taking in the view. The valley below was dotted with small settlements and farms, a place where her captors might easily spot them. But he understood that crossing the valley would be dangerous, yet it was unavoidable if they wanted to put sufficient distance between themselves and those pursuing her.
Ahuli studied the valley carefully.
"We must go through carefully," she said. "Do not rush. Watch for signs of anyone waiting. The land is open, but there are ways to hide if we are careful." Samuel nodded. He realized that this journey was no longer about speed alone. Every movement, every choice needed to be calculated. They had already survived the night, the forest, and countless uncertainties. But the valley would test them in new ways. As they began their descent, Samuel could feel the tension in the air. He noticed the slight quiver in Ahuli's hands, the way her eyes darted to every sound. Though she remained composed outwardly, he could sense the underlying anxiety. He understood now that bravery did not mean the absence of fear. It meant acting despite it. Midway down the slope, they encountered a small group of travelers. Samuel instinctively crouched low, signaling Ahuli to stay close. The travelers were harmless, merely moving along the same route, but the encounter served as a reminder that the world was full of unknown variables. Every face could be friend or foe, and trust had to be earned cautiously. After passing the travelers, they continued through the valley, taking care to stay in the shadows of small hills and trees. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, and Samuel felt a mixture of relief and tension. Relief that they had avoided immediate danger, and tension because the next step, finding a safe place to rest for the night, remained uncertain. Finally, as darkness approached, they found a small grove of trees near a stream where they could set up a temporary camp. Samuel started a small fire, careful to keep it low, and they shared a modest meal of bread and dried meat. The silence of the evening was comforting, but it was a fragile comfort, one that could be broken at any moment. Ahuli sat quietly beside him, her gaze distant. "You see now," she said softly, "why I cannot let you walk away. You have begun something bigger than yourself. We cannot ignore it." Samuel nodded, feeling the truth of her words. Courage was no longer enough. Wisdom, patience, and resilience would be required. He realized that helping Ahuli meant confronting not only external dangers but also the moral and emotional consequences of his actions. They took turns keeping watch that night, each aware that any lapse could be disastrous. Samuel thought about the journey ahead, the challenges, the unknown threats, and the lessons he would need to learn. He also thought about Ahuli, her strength and her unwavering resolve. She was no longer just someone he had rescued. She was his equal, a partner in navigating the dangers that lay ahead. As the fire dwindled, Samuel felt a deep understanding settle within him. Saving Ahuli had changed everything. It was no longer a simple act of courage. It was a responsibility, a journey that required commitment and a test of character. He realized that he could not walk away. Not from her, not from the consequences, not from the moral weight of what he had done. And so, as the stars appeared above the valley, Samuel and Ahuli sat in quiet reflection, each aware of the challenges that awaited them, yet strengthened by the trust they had built. Path. They knew the path forward would be difficult, but they also knew that together they could face what came next. The early morning mist clung to the valley like a thin veil as Samuel and Ahuli moved cautiously toward the distant ridge. Both knew that danger was near. The threat of her former captors lingered like a shadow over every step. Samuel's heart pounded, not only from exertion but from the knowledge that their journey had reached a turning point. Until now, their flight had been about survival, but today, survival would require confrontation. Ahuli led the way with quiet confidence. Her eyes scanned the ground for tracks, her ears tuned to the slightest noise. Samuel had come to trust her instincts completely. Though he had always considered himself capable in the wilderness, he realized that Ahuli's skills surpassed his own. She could read the land, the signs of human presence, and even the behavior of animals in ways he had never learned. Samuel felt a mixture of relief and admiration, knowing that without her, he would be far more vulnerable. As they reached the top of a small hill, the valley stretched out before them. Samuel's gaze fell on a cluster of men near a distant river crossing. They were armed, moving cautiously, clearly searching for something. Or someone. Ahuli crouched low beside him, pointing silently. "They are looking for me," she said softly. "We cannot hide forever. We must face this." Samuel felt a surge of fear, but it was tempered by determination. He had promised her safety, and now he realized that safety would not come from avoidance. It would come from facing the danger directly, from acting with courage and strategy. He nodded to Ahuli. "Then we face it together," he said firmly. They moved quietly through the underbrush, using every shadow, every tree, and every fold of the land to their advantage. Samuel kept his eyes on the distant men while following Ahuli's lead. She paused often, listening and watching, signaling when it was safe to move. Each step was deliberate, each movement calculated to reduce the risk of detection. Eventually they reached a narrow ridge that overlooked the men. From this vantage point, Samuel could see the captors clearly. They were rough-looking, armed with rifles and clubs, and their expressions showed a mix of anger and determination. Samuel realized the danger they faced was very real. A single misstep could result in capture, or worse. Ahuli crouched low beside him. "We must use what we know," she whispered. "We can distract them, divide them, and escape. But you must be ready to act quickly." Samuel nodded, his heart racing. "I am ready." Ahuli began to move silently, slipping down the ridge toward a large boulder that jutted from the hillside. Samuel followed, staying low and careful to avoid detection. From behind the boulder, they could see the captors more clearly. Ahuli pointed to a smaller group slightly apart from the main men. "We can create a diversion here," she explained. "If we act together, we can turn this in our favor." Samuel felt a mixture of excitement and fear. The plan was risky, but it relied on their combined skills and courage. He had always faced challenges, but nothing like this. He took a deep breath, centering himself, and prepared for what was to come. Ahuli signaled him to move, and together they advanced, using the terrain to conceal their approach.
They threw small rocks to create distractions, drawing the attention of the smaller group of captors. The men reacted immediately, looking toward the noise, giving Samuel and Ahuli a chance to move closer to the ridge's edge.
Suddenly, one of the men noticed movement near the boulder. Samuel froze, but Ahuli acted quickly. She shouted, throwing a handful of dirt and leaves into the air, creating a momentary cloud that confused their pursuers. Samuel took advantage of the chaos to push a large branch down the slope, causing a loud crash. The captors turned, shouting and scrambling to see what had happened.
In that brief window, Ahuli motioned for Samuel to follow her along a narrow path that wound around the ridge. They moved swiftly, but carefully, keeping low and staying as silent as possible. Samuel realized that this was not just about escaping. It was about strategy, about using intelligence rather than brute force to outmaneuver their opponents. As they rounded a bend, Ahuli paused, listening intently. Samuel did the same. From the faint sounds ahead, he could hear the captors regrouping, trying to track their movements. Ahuli signaled him to stop. "We must wait," she whispered. "We cannot rush." "They will tire, and then we can act." They crouched behind a cluster of rocks, the tension between them thick and palpable. Samuel admired Ahuli's calm under pressure. Her focus was unwavering and her courage was contagious. He realized that she had not only survived the hardships imposed on her, but had also learned to use every circumstance to her advantage. Hours seemed to pass as they waited, breaking. Samuel and Ahuli stayed still, barely breathing, listening to the distant sounds of movement. Finally, the captors began to disperse, frustrated and confused by the unexpected obstacles. Ahuli motioned to Samuel, and they advanced carefully, moving closer to the ridge's exit. But from this vantage point, they could see the open land beyond the ridge. Samuel felt a surge of hope. Freedom was close, but the danger had not passed. They would need to maintain their vigilance until they were safely beyond reach. Ahuli looked at Samuel, her expression serious. "We are almost there," she said softly. "But you must understand, this is only one part of what we face. Courage is not enough. You must stay sharp, stay alert, and trust what you have learned." Samuel nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had always thought courage was the key to survival, but now he understood that strategy, patience, and careful observation were equally important. He also realized that trust between them was vital. Inspiration. Their combined efforts had carried them this far, and it would continue to do so. As they moved along the ridge, they encountered a narrow ravine. Body Samuel carefully helped Ahuli across, making sure each step was steady. She did the same for him, and in that moment, Samuel felt a deep sense of partnership. They were no longer just survivor and protector. They were equals, relying on each other's strengths to overcome the challenges before them. Once across, they continued toward a dense thicket that provided cover for the final leg of their escape. Breaths. Samuel could see the sun beginning to set, casting long shadows across the land. He knew that time was critical. They needed to reach the next safe point before darkness fully descended. As they approached the thicket, one of the captors appeared in the distance, scanning the land for any sign of movement. Samuel froze, but Ahuli acted quickly. "Brace," she whispered instructions, guiding him to a hidden path that led around the captor. They moved silently, keeping low, and managed to slip past without being seen. Samuel felt a rush of relief, tempered by the knowledge that danger was still near. Ahuli looked at him, a faint smile on her face. "We are not yet free," she said softly, "but we are closer than before. Remember, each step matters." Press. Each decision matters. They continued through the thicket, finally reaching a small clearing where they could rest briefly. Breath. Samuel noticed the exhaustion etched into Ahuli's features, but also the unwavering determination. She had not wavered once, not even when the captors were near, and Samuel realized that her courage was a force that went beyond fear. As night fell, they made a small fire in the clearing, keeping it low to avoid detection. Samuel reflected on the events of the day. They had faced her captors, navigated the dangers of the land, and survived through intelligence, courage, and trust. He felt a deep sense of respect for Ahuli, understanding that she had not only survived her hardships, but had also learned to turn every challenge into an opportunity. Ahuli spoke quietly beside him. "You have done well.
she said. But remember, the journey is not over, Britt. Danger is always near. We must stay aware and be ready. Samuel nodded, feeling a sense of responsibility heavier than ever before. He understood now that their journey was not just about escape, but about facing challenges with strategy and courage, about learning from each other, and about understanding that true bravery required patience and careful planning. As the firelight flickered across their faces, Samuel realized that this journey had changed him. He had entered the forest as a traveler seeking routine and simplicity. Now he was part of something far greater, a test of courage, strategy, and trust. And he understood that with Ahuli by his side, he could face whatever came next. Painted the horizon in soft shades of pink and gold as Samuel and Ahuli emerged from the forest. The night had been long, filled with tension and careful movements, but for the first time in days they felt a small sense of relief. The danger of immediate pursuit seemed to have lessened, and the wide-open plains ahead promised a path toward freedom. Yet both knew that freedom was more than distance. It was about understanding what they had faced and what it meant for the lives ahead. Bay. Samuel looked at Ahuli, her figure moving confidently despite exhaustion. She had grown stronger in these past days, not just physically but in spirit. Every challenge they had faced together had revealed a depth of courage he had not anticipated. He realized now that her strength was not just in survival but in resilience, the ability to face fear and danger without losing herself. They walked in silence for a time, letting the quiet morning calm their minds. Samuel's thoughts drifted to the journey they had undertaken. The decision to help Ahuli had seemed simple at first, a moral choice to do what was right, but the reality had proven far more complex. He had faced fear, uncertainty, and the weight of responsibility. Each step had tested him, and each choice had shaped the man he was becoming. Ahuli finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. "You have learned much, Samuel. But more than learning, you have changed. You see now that helping someone is never simple. It carries consequences, responsibilities, and choices that cannot be ignored." Samuel nodded, understanding the truth in her words. He had entered the plains seeking routine and safety, but he was leaving with knowledge of courage, trust, and human strength he could never have imagined. "I understand," he said quietly. "And I would not undo it, even if I could. The journey has taught me who I am." They continued along a winding path that led them toward a small settlement nestled in the distance. Samuel had decided it was time to ensure Ahuli's safety beyond the wilderness. He knew that once she was among her people or in a safe place, she could reclaim her life fully. Yet, part of him hesitated. He had grown to respect her courage and independence, and he knew their shared experience would leave a permanent mark on both their lives. As they neared the settlement, they passed a small stream where the water was clear and inviting. Samuel paused, allowing Ahuli to refill a small canteen. The movement was quiet, simple, but the peacefulness of the moment contrasted sharply with the danger they had faced in the forest and plains. Samuel realized that survival was not just about avoiding danger. It was also about appreciating these small moments of calm, the fleeting peace that reminded them of life beyond fear. Ahuli glanced at him with a faint smile. "You have done more than help me," she said. "You have faced the consequences of your actions with courage. Many would have fled or ignored what they saw. You did not." "That is rare." Samuel felt a warmth spread through him at her words. Desperation. From Ahuli, someone who had endured so much and had such strength, was more meaningful than he could have imagined.
He had acted out of instinct and conscience, yet her acknowledgement gave him a deeper sense of purpose.
The settlement came into view, small but welcoming, with smoke rising from chimneys and the faint sound of people beginning their day. Samuel slowed, allowing Ahuli to move ahead. He knew that once she entered the safety of the settlement, his role in her immediate survival would end. Yet he also understood that his journey had forever intertwined with hers, creating a bond that distance or time could not erase. Ahuli turned to him, her eyes meeting his. "This is where I stay for now," she said.
You may continue your journey, but remember, what you did will always be part of who you are.
"You cannot walk away completely." Samuel nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He had learned that courage alone was not enough. Responsibility and conscience were equally important. Saving someone was not a single act, but a commitment that affected both lives deeply. "I will remember," he replied. "Brace. Always." He watched as Ahuli approached the settlement, blending into the community with a quiet confidence. She had faced captivity, escape, and confrontation, and now she moved among people who could offer safety and normalcy. Samuel felt a mix of relief and admiration. Relief that she was safe, and admiration for the incredible resilience she had shown through every challenge. As he turned to leave, Samuel paused to reflect on the journey. The plains had taught him lessons he could not have learned elsewhere. The weight of choices, the courage required to act in the face of danger, and the responsibility that comes with helping another human being. He realized that life was not a series of simple decisions, but a complex path of actions, consequences, and relationships. Each choice carried weight, and each act of courage shaped the person he was becoming. Samuel began walking again, the path ahead open but uncertain. He knew he would return to trading, to his routine life, but nothing would ever be the same.
The journey with Ahuli had changed him, teaching him that true bravery included not only physical courage but also emotional and moral fortitude. He understood now that helping someone else meant confronting one's own limitations, fears.
As he walked, he remembered the moments that had defined their journey. The night of escape, the careful navigation through the forest, the tense confrontation with her captors, and the shared quiet moments of reflection and trust. Each memory was a thread in the tapestry of his experience, shaping his understanding of human courage and the power of partnership. Samuel also thought of Ahuli, her strength, her intelligence, and her unwavering determination. She had survived hardships that would have broken many, and she had taught him lessons he would carry for the rest of his life. He realized that helping her had not only saved her life but had transformed his own, leaving an imprint that would never fade. By midday, Samuel had reached a high ridge overlooking the plains. He paused to rest and looked back toward the settlement where Ahuli had disappeared into safety. A gentle breeze carried the sounds of the land, the faint murmur of the settlement, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds. Samuel felt a profound sense of gratitude. Gratitude for her courage, for the lessons he had learned, and for the chance to act when it mattered most. He understood that life would continue, filled with routine, work, and travel, but the journey with Ahuli would remain a defining chapter. It was a reminder that bravery and compassion often required difficult choices, and that facing the consequences of one's actions was as important as the actions themselves. As Samuel continued his journey across the plains, he felt a sense of peace. He had acted courageously, faced danger, and learned the value of trust and partnership. He had been changed forever, not just by the events themselves, but by the moral and emotional journey they had inspired. Looking forward, he saw endless possibilities. The path was open, the future uncertain. But he carried with him the strength, courage, and lessons learned from his journey with Ahuli. He knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them with a deeper understanding of responsibility, bravery, and human connection.
And so Samuel walked on, the wind at his back, the sun warming his face, and the memory of Ahuli's strength guiding him.
He had learned that true courage is not only about facing danger, but about accepting the consequences of one's choices and growing through the experience. The plains stretched endlessly before him, but Samuel felt ready for whatever came next. forever changed by the journey he had undertaken and the life he had touched.